When the folks in Willow Creek first saw Clara Dawson standing alone at the edge of Red Rock Canyon, they figured she was just grieving. Every single sunset, without fail, she'd be there. Most widows in town grieved quietly, but there was something different about Clara. It was like the wind itself held its breath when it passed her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't praying. She wasn't whispering to the heavens for the man she'd lost. She just stood there, staring west, watching the sun dip behind those jagged cliffs like a dying ember. It was as if she was waiting for someone to keep a promise they'd made a long, long time ago. Clara's heart had been broken for almost a year. The story was a familiar whisper in the saloons and along the town's dusty main street. Everyone knew how her fiancé, Jacob Hale, had ridden out to settle a land dispute and simply never came back. His horse had limped home days later, the saddle stained with blood, but Clara refused to truly mourn. Because no body was ever found, a sliver of hope, however painful, remained. The town mayor, a man who saw things in black and white, once told her, a woman should move on. There's a fine rancher up north wanting a wife, but Clara would just shake her head. Her voice, though soft, carried more weight than any angry shout. My heart is broken, but I will wait. Jacob Hale was the kind of man you read about in old stories. He had a steady voice, gentle hands, and a loyalty so fierce it made enemies think twice and friends hold on tighter. Clara loved him because he listened to her, truly listened, as if her thoughts were the most important thing in the world, as if her presence filled an empty space inside him. The day before he disappeared, he'd held her hands beneath the old cottonwood tree, the one they always met under. He told her, "If ever you doubt me, Clara, meet me at Red Rock Canyon at sunset. I will come. I'll always come." She never forgot that promise. She never forgot the scent of dust and pine on his coat when he kissed her goodbye for what she prayed wasn't he the last time. So now, every single evening, Clara made the climb. She'd walk up that narrow ridge in her faded blue dress, her boots worn down from the same familiar path. Her brown hair, often tied loosely, would catch the wind, flying like a wild banner of her devotion. And she would stand there, her back straight, unflinching, as if she were single-handedly guarding the horizon. Some evenings, the sky blazed a fiery crimson. On other nights, it softened to a pale gold, gentle as a promise whispered in a dark room, and through it all, she waited. One cold evening in late autumn, when the canyon was filled with more shadows than light, a stranger rode into Willow Creek. His horse was caked in dust from long miles on the trail, and his coat carried that same scent of travel. He had a rugged look about him, the kind that spoke of hard years, but it was his eyes that caught your attention. They were dark, searching, and alert, carrying a weight that made the town blacksmith mutter to his apprentice, "A man doesn't wear eyes like that unless he's seen the edge of hell." The stranger didn't offer his name. He just walked into the saloon and asked one simple question, "Where might I find Clara Dawson?" The whole room went still. In a town like Willow Creek, word travels faster than a wildfire. By the time Clara made her way back from her vigil at the canyon, lanterns were already glowing up and down the street. A small crowd had gathered near the watering trough, buzzing with hushed speculation. The stranger stood among them, a silent question mark no one quite knew how to answer. Clara approached cautiously, dust clinging to the hem of her dress. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were full of questions. "You look in for me?" she asked, her voice steady. The stranger tipped his hat. "Ma'am, I believe I owe you the truth." A small crease appeared between her brows. "I don't believe we've met." "No," he said, his voice quiet, "but I knew someone who loved you more than his own life." A heartbeat of silence fell over the street, so profound you could almost hear it. "Jacob," Clara whispered. The name trembled in the cool night air like fragile glass. The stranger gave a single, slow nod. "I rode with him. The day he left for Red Rock. The day he disappeared." Clara took a slow, deliberate breath, the kind you take when you're about to reopen a wound that never healed right in the first place. "Tell me," she said, her voice firm. "Tell me everything. The stranger swallowed hard, the weight of his story visible on his face. Jacob didn't disappear, Miss Dawson. He was taken. The words landed like stones. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Taken, she repeated, the word barely a whisper. By whom? A gang, he replied, his voice growing tight with anger. They call themselves the Silver Creek Riders. Rustlers. Killers. Men who were cruelty like a second skin. He explained. Jacob wasn't supposed to cross their path. But he saw them threatening a family, trying to run them off their land. He stood up for them, and that made him their enemy. Clara's breath hitched. The image of Jacob, always so protective, standing against a group of violent men, was terrifyingly clear in her mind. The stranger continued. He fought them, harder than any man I've ever seen. But they outnumbered him. When I tried to help, I was shot. By the time I came to, days had passed, they'd vanished. And so had he. Clara's mind was reeling. She finally asked the question that had been burning inside her for a year. Why come now, after all this time? The stranger looked at her, his eyes filled with something that looked a lot like guilt. Because a man with his last breath told me, if I ever saw daylight again, I should find the woman named Clara Dawson, and tell her Jacob Hale wasn't dead. A collective gasp swept through the town. Clara felt her knees weaken, the world blurring at the edges. Not dead. No, ma'am. The stranger shook his head, his gaze unwavering. He's alive, hurt, but alive. They're holding him somewhere near the canyon country. The wind went still. The lanterns flickered, casting dancing shadows on the faces of the stunned townspeople. Clara's heartbeat thundered in her ears, a drumbeat of a year's worth of pain and a sudden, terrifying surge of hope. Then the stranger added the final blow, the words that would change everything. And he's waiting for you. Emotion surged through her, a tidal wave of hope and fear so powerful it threatened to pull her under. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. She wanted to collapse right there on the dusty street. But she didn't. She was Clara Dawson. She was the woman who waited. She steadied herself, drawing on a strength she didn't know she had. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice clear. Nothing, the stranger said. Except your courage. Clara's gaze shifted, looking past the crowd toward the dark, imposing line of the canyon. The very last hint of sunset lingered on the horizon, like a promise not yet broken. A year of waiting had come to this single moment. Her decision was instant. Then we ride at dawn. But before anyone could react, before the stranger could even nod in agreement, the church pastor came running down the street, breathless and wild-eyed. Clara, he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. The canyon ridge, it just collapsed. There was an explosion. The crowd froze. Every eye turned to the pastor, then to Clara. She turned slowly, a chilling fear hollowing out her chest. Jacob was somewhere near that canyon, and now something was terribly, terribly wrong. The hope that had just bloomed in her heart was now tangled with a new, sharper terror. Her wait was over, but a new nightmare had just begun. Thank you so much for watching. If you were captivated by Clara's story of hope and determination, the pastor's words still hung in the cold night air, trembling like a lantern flame caught in a sudden wind. I felt as if someone had reached inside my chest and squeezed the breath from my ribs. The canyon ridge, the very place Jacob might have been held, had just collapsed. An explosion. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel possible. If hope had been a candle in my heart, that announcement threatened to snuff it out entirely. But I'm Clara Dawson, and I've never been the type to let fear finish a sentence that hope had started. I stepped toward the pastor, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. What did you see? I was returning from a visit to the Miller family. The pastor gasped, his words coming out in shaky bursts. There was a flash, like dynamite, then the cliff gave way. Half the ridge just fell into the canyon. My eyes flicked to the stranger beside me. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing with a terrible recognition. Dynamite wasn't nature's doing. It was the work of men, men with something to hide. Silver Creek riders, he murmured, his voice low and hard. They're covering their tracks. My pulse kicked hard against my throat. If Jacob was there, the stranger shook his head sharply, cutting me off. We ride now. Dawn might be too late. Those words carved through the frightened crowd, turning fear into urgency. Lanterns were quickly raised, saddles tightened, boots thudding across the frosted ground. The stranger grabbed his horse's reins and looked directly at me. You ride with me. You know the canyon better than any ranch hand in this town. I nodded, though my stomach churned with a sickening mix of dread and determination. For a year, I had walked the canyon's edge with prayerful silence. Tonight, I would ride into its heart with a courage I never knew I carried. The air was crisp as we galloped north, the moon washing the trail in silver. Hoofs pounded the frozen earth in a frantic rhythm. Breath steamed in white clouds. The wind whipped my hair loose from its braid. I clung to the saddle with one hand and to hope with the other. Jacob alive, Jacob waiting, Jacob under the same stars, somewhere beyond the dark, jagged horizon. The stranger rode beside me, silent but determined. After a while, his voice cut through the sound of our ride. There's something I should tell you, Clara. I didn't look at him. My gaze was locked on the silhouette of the canyon stretching ahead. Tell me, when I said Jacob fought for a family the riders threatened, that was true. But there's more. He paused, as though sifting through a painful memory. He could have run, could have stayed hidden. But he stepped out into the open because he said he couldn't live with himself if he let evil win that day. I swallowed hard, the cold air stinging my throat. Jacob always carried a quiet hero inside him. The kind that didn't need an audience. That sounds like him, I managed to say. The stranger nodded. I think he believed he would make it back to you. I blinked against the wind, a sudden blur in my vision. I believed it too. We reached the canyon rim, just as the wind shifted, carrying the faint, acrid scent of burnt timber. A blanket of dust still hung over the collapsed ridge, sparkling faintly under the moon. The once solid cliffside was now broken stone, fractured like a bone that would never heal straight again. This way, I whispered, sliding off my horse. The stranger followed as I led him down a narrow path carved by years of weather and the cautious steps of wandering deer. The canyon walls rose around us like ancient, silent guardians. Shadows stretched across jagged stone, playing tricks on the eyes. Every sound seemed sharpened, the crunch of gravel beneath our boots, the low rumble of distant wind, my own heartbeat thudding like a restless drum against my ribs. Near the base of the collapse, I stopped. There, half buried beneath fallen rock, lay the charred remains of a small wooden structure, a lookout shed. A guard post, something meant to hide what the riders didn't want seen. My chest tightened. Jacob, I whispered, the name a prayer on my lips. Careful, the stranger said softly, his voice a low warning. We don't know who's still around. We studied the wreckage. I forced myself forward, lifting a broken plank, then another. I searched with frantic hands, my breath growing uneven. I pulled loose a burnt piece of rope, a boot print in the mud, a torn cloth. Each piece was a whisper of a man who should have been here but wasn't. The knife rose, wrapped around a splintered beam. Was a strip of leather I instantly recognized, Jacob's hat band. My knees went weak. I sank to the ground, holding the singed band as if it were his hand. The stranger knelt beside me, his expression carved with sympathy. He was here, I whispered, hot tears finally slipping down my cheeks. He was right here. The stranger placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, which means he may still be alive. The riders wouldn't use dynamite if they intended to die in it. This was a cover-up. They're moving him. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand, a new resolve hardening inside me. Then we follow. The stranger drew in a breath. There's something else at work tonight. Look. He pointed to the far end of the canyon where faint, flickering light danced between darkened cliffs. Campfire light. My breath caught in my throat. They're still here, I whispered. No, the stranger said, his eyes narrowing. That's not them. I turned to him, confused. Then who? Someone who got here before we did. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Someone left a message. Together, we approached the flickering light. There, burned into the sand, lay a crude arrow made of glowing embers deliberately arranged, pointing deeper into the canyon. I stared, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Jacob did that, I breathed. The stranger knelt, touching the embers with 2 fingers, still warm. Not more than an hour old. I clutched Jacob's hat band against my chest, the scorched leather a tangible link to him. He's alive. He knew I'd come, before the stranger could answer. The canyon echoed with a sudden, sharp sound, the crack of a rifle splitting the night. The bullet struck the dirt inches from my boots. I gasped and fell back as the stranger grabbed my arm, dragging me behind a jagged rock formation. Voices echoed in the distance, harsh, angry, too many to count. The Silver Creek riders had seen us. My breath trembled in my lungs. The stranger unsheathed his revolver, the metallic click echoing the cold finality of our situation. We've been found, he whispered, and from the shadows beyond the canyon wall, footsteps approached, slow, deliberate, merciless. The storm clouds had finally thinned, their dark bellies giving way as the first light of dawn crept over the valley. It was a slow, tentative light, as if unsure of what it would find. I stepped outside the cabin, clutching Elias's old, worn coat around my shoulders. It was more than just fabric. It was a memory, a tangible piece of him, and it felt as heavy as the quiet world around me. The air was still, holding its breath, waiting. Behind me, the cabin door led out a long, weary creak. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. Tom. He emerged from the shadows, but he wasn't the man I once knew. The man I once trusted with my life and with Elias's. His clothes were torn, dirt-caked and ragged. His face was a hollow mask of exhaustion and despair, his eyes sunken and haunted. And in his hand, shaking so badly I could hear the faint rattle, was a gun. It was a weapon he clearly had no desire to hold. His voice, when he spoke my name, was a broken, ragged thing. Mara, he rasped. I never wanted to hurt you. I stood my ground. I refused to let him see fear, refused to give him the satisfaction of my retreat. I had been running from shadows for too long. Now, I would face the truth, no matter how ugly. I turned slowly, my gaze locking onto his. You lied to me, I whispered, the words carrying on the cold morning air. You hid Elias's hat. You stood by and watched me grieve, letting me believe he died out there all alone. Tom swallowed hard, a painful, desperate motion in his throat. The gun in his hand trembled. I was ashamed, he confessed, his voice cracking under the weight of his guilt. I didn't mean for him to fall. I tried. I tried to warn him about the ridge. The ground was loose after the rain. He slipped, his eyes darted away, unable to meet mine. I panicked. I saw the hat lying there, and I hid it because I thought you'd hate me forever. I couldn't bear it. A flicker of something softened in my eyes, but it was a fleeting thing, like a candle flame in a storm. Tom, Elias trusted you. He called you brother. A single tear traced a path through the grime on Tom's cheek, a testament to the friendship he had shattered. And I failed him, he choked out. His gaze fell to the gun in his hand as if seeing it for the first time. With a shuddering breath, he opened his fingers. The pistol dropped, landing in the soft mud with a dull, final thud. The sound echoed the end of his deception, the end of my ignorance. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Tom said, taking a step back, creating a space between us that felt as wide as the valley itself. I can't, just, let me face what's coming. As he spoke those words, I felt a colossal weight lift from my chest. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't acceptance, it was release. The heavy burden of not knowing, of the questions that had tormented my every waking moment, was finally gone. The truth, however painful, was liberating. In that quiet moment of surrender, a new sound cut through the silence. The rhythmic drumming of hooves, growing closer. Sheriff Hale appeared on the rise, riding hard, his hat pulled low against the morning chill. His sharp eyes scanned the scene in an instant, taking in my stance, Tom's broken form, the gun in the mud. "Mara, you all right?" he called out, his voice a steady, comforting presence in the chaos of my emotions. I simply nodded, the gesture feeling both small and monumental. Tom didn't run. He didn't resist. He just stood there, waiting for the justice he knew he deserved. Sheriff Hale dismounted with practiced ease, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. He walked over to Tom and placed a firm, steady hand on his shoulder. It wasn't an act of aggression, but one of grim duty. "I'll take him in," the sheriff said, his gaze meeting mine. "He'll get a fair trial. The law will see to it." Tom closed his eyes, a wave of what looked like relief washing over his hollow features. "Thank you, both," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Sheriff Hale led him toward the horse. He tied Tom's hands gently, with a practiced efficiency that was devoid of cruelty. It was a procedure, nothing more. As they prepared to leave, Tom turned to me one last time, his eyes pleading. "Elias loved you more than life itself," he whispered, his final confession. "Don't let my mistake, my cowardice, steal the rest of your years from you." Tears finally welled in my eyes. They weren't for Tom, and they weren't even for the sharp, immediate pain of Elias's death. They were for the truth, the long, agonizing, buried truth, finally set free into the morning air. Sheriff Hale tipped his hat to me, a silent gesture of respect and understanding. "I'll send word once he's in custody and everything's been processed." I watched as they rode off, to figures shrinking against the vast landscape, until they disappeared over the ridge. And then, I was alone, truly alone, but it was a different kind of solitude. The wind brushed through the tall grass around my boots, a soft, cleansing whisper. In the distance, the birds, silent during the tense standoff, began to sing again, their melody filling the valley. For the first time since the day Elias died, the world didn't feel haunted. It didn't feel empty, it just felt quiet. I reached into the pocket of the worn coat, my fingers closing around the cool, familiar shape of Elias's silver ring. I held it up, letting it catch the new light. Looking out at the mountains, now painted in strokes of gold, and rose by the rising sun, I whispered to the wind, to the memory of him, to my own weary heart, "You can rest now." And as the sun climbed higher, chasing the last of the shadows from the valley floor, I felt it. A small, tentative, but unmistakable spark. The first warm feeling of peace. It was the end of a long, dark chapter, and the beginning of a new day.